Owen Fairclough is in our newsroom. Owen, trade disputes, Pyongyang's, of course, weapons program led to some rather tense moments. What can we expect during Tillerson's trip?
Mike, that certainly looked like the priority in order of business between these two countries, trade and the Korean Peninsula crisis. Back in April, when Chinese President Xi Jinping visited Donald Trump. Maybe it's the other way around now, though, with the threat of all-out war between the US and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea that's put that crisis right at the top of the agenda as the US Secretary of State prepares to lay the groundwork for a return visit by his boss to China.
Chinese President Xi Jinping meeting US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson on his first trip to China in March. This week, he'll be back in Beijing.
Visit Secretary Tillerson will discuss a range of issues, including the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, also trade and investment.
Those are some of the most intractable issues for two interdependent powers. They exchange hundreds of billions of dollars of goods every year, but often clash over trade practices. Even so, Beijing sees opportunities.
The leaders and senior officials of the two countries have maintained close communication and coordination. We believe this contributes to the overall development of the relations between China and the United States.
Xi and Trump forged a warm relationship when Trump hosted his Chinese counterpart in Florida earlier this year. That relationship has since been tested, Trump criticizing China by claiming it wasn't putting enough pressure on the Democratic People's Republic of Korea over its nuclear weapons tests. But Trump recognizes China's support for the latest round of sanctions.
I applaud China's latest action to restrict its trade with North Korea. And in particular, I applaud China for breaking off all banking relationships with North Korea.
Away from the geopolitics, quiet diplomacy continues. Chinese and US officials meeting in Washington to continue what they call a social and cultural dialogue that aims to promote mutual understanding.
We need to think about what the world will be like 50 years from now and how China and the U.S. can maintain their cooperation to the benefit of not just our two peoples, but also people around the world.
A reminder that despite their differences, these two countries must find a way to get along.
And they seemingly do, Mike. That visit by US President Trump is expected in November, with Secretary Tillerson, as I mentioned before, laying the groundwork. He's also hosting the social and cultural dialogue between these two countries this Thursday. Then he'll be leaving for Beijing. He'll be meeting many of the same people who laid the groundwork for that historic summit here in the United States when President Xi visited. Of course, with this DPRK crisis moving so quickly, it's very, very difficult to predict where things will stand by November. But after Trump has been so critical of China in its role over the sanctions against the DPRK, he knows these two countries must work together. And as we saw in my report there, the words have been much more positive from Trump in the past few days, particularly when it comes to sanctions against the DPRK. I mentioned quiet diplomacy. It does continue here in Washington, D.C. We should be able to bring you some pictures here from China's embassy here in the U.S. Capitol. You can see there Ivanka Trump, President Trump's daughter, her husband Jared Kushner, who's one of the president's senior advisors, there with China's ambassador to the United States at a function at the Chinese embassy. This is before that social and cultural dialogue takes place at the U.S. State Department on Thursday. You can see there as well Vice Premier Liu, who I mentioned in my report. Many of these dignitaries and these Chinese officials here in U.S. to continue that conversation that they've had for decades now. Mike.